Seeking the backing of the most powerful pro-Israel lobby in the United States, the top Republican candidates make their pitch to AIPAC. You're watching Inside Story US 2012 from Washington. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu. It's the most powerful pro-Israel lobby in the United States. AIPAC, or the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, is holding its biggest annual conference yet, with around 13,000 delegates in Washington. For all those bidding to be the next U.S. president, it has become an essential campaign stop. The group has strong ties to the religious right and evangelical voters, and it's a very influential force in Washington politics. Demonstrators from the Occupy movement held a small protest outside the event, urging no war on Iran and no U.S. tax dollars for Israel. On Sunday, Barack Obama took to the stage. He told the audience Israel had never had a better friend in the White House, but he did not support Israeli military action against Iran's nuclear facilities, at least not yet. Now, 3 of the 4 Republican candidates bidding to unseat the U.S. president addressed the conference on the biggest day of the nomination battle so far, so-called Super Tuesday. Rick Santorum flew in especially for the event before heading back to Ohio. Mitt Romney and Newt Gingrich appeared via satellite link. They have all tried to paint the U.S. president as an undependable partner for Israel and weak on Iran. First, let's hear from Barack Obama.
While we may at times disagree, as friends sometimes will, the bonds between the United States and Israel are unbreakable. And the commitment of the United States to the security of Israel is ironclad.
We've heard a lot of words from the administration. Its clear message has been to warn Israel to consider the costs of military action against Iran. I don't believe we should be issuing public warnings.
These are the folks who have been very clear about what their intent. And the idea that they won't, if they do get a nuclear weapon, that they won't use it. Because, well, they're rational actors, as General Dempsey said. What leads you to believe that these folks are rational actors?
If an Israeli prime minister decides that he has to avoid the threat of a second Holocaust through preemptive measures, that I would require no advance notice to understand why I would support the right of Israel to survive in a dangerous world.
So what role do pro-Israel lobby groups and AIPAC in particular play in the U.S. election, and why are they courted by those competing to be the next U.S. president? To discuss that, I'm joined from Chicago by Professor John Mearsheimer, the co-author of the book, The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy, and here in the studio by Larry Greenfield from the think tank, the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs, and by former White House and U.S. State Department official Hillary Mann Leverett. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Hillary, let me start with you, and I think I should mention at the outset that in the early days of your career, you were an intern at AIPAC, but since then...
My first job in Washington.
Right, but since then, politically, you've sort of moved on, right?
Yes, I like to say I've been mugged by reality.
Okay. Why is it an absolute must for a U.S. president, or for a very senior official in the administration, or for someone wanting to become president to go to AIPAC?
It's critically important for any U.S. contender for the presidency to go to AIPAC to interact with the U.S. with the Israel lobby in a favorable way, because it enables that candidate to show, first and foremost, that that candidate is strong, that candidate believes in U.S. exceptionalism, U.S. preeminence in the world, that the United States is still very much the indispensable nation in the world. The U.S. has decisive influence in the Middle East, and the United States is not going to let that influence go, but as manifest in any kind of threat, real or perceived, against Israel. It allows that candidate to really demonstrate that. And that's in addition to all of the kind of tactical things here in the United States in terms of getting votes, financing, close states like Florida and Ohio. In addition to that kind of day-to-day politics, the bigger strategic driver for American candidates to go to AIPAC to deal with the pro-Israel lobby in a very friendly way, is that it gives them this platform to demonstrate their dedication to U.S. preeminence as the United States as the indispensable nation that will continue to dominate and be a hegemonic influence in the Middle East.
Okay, let's look at how AIPAC exerts some of its influence in Washington. Let's look at this. Now, first of all, it helps ensure candidates get some financial backing from members of the organization. In 2008, pro-Israel political action committees gave $3 million to congressional and presidential candidates. In 2012, we now have so-called super PACs, of course. Republican candidate Newt Gingrich has, for example, benefited from a very large donation from billionaire casino magnate Sheldon Adelson, who's pledged up to $100 million. And support for Israel is the single biggest issue for Adelson. Lobbies such as AIPAC are also very influential on Capitol Hill. Last year, it lobbied on 23 bills regarding issues such as sanctions on Iran. Let's go to Dr. Mearsheimer, who's in Chicago. And when we talk about the influence here of AIPAC on U.S. politics, is it perhaps being a little bit exaggerated, or does it really have influence on how things turn out here?
No, the Israel lobby more generally has a tremendous amount of influence. And if a presidential candidate or the president himself did not go before the AIPAC conference and pledge allegiance to Israel, that candidate would be in real trouble, because it would not only be AIPAC that put its gun sights on the president or on one of those candidates, but it would be a lot of other very powerful
I guess that's my point. How would the president or any candidate be in trouble? Exactly. Is it money?
Money is part of it. What the media said about the person would matter a lot. What happened with Jewish voters would matter a lot. I mean, just go back to the 2000 election, which was decided by a few votes in the state of Florida. Florida has a large Jewish population, and by the way, it has a large Cuban American population as well. No president or presidential candidate wants to risk alienating Jews in Florida or Cuban Americans in Florida. So it's no accident that the president and the Republican candidates are going to go to great lengths to say whatever they think is necessary to make AIPAC and the Israel lobby more generally very happy.
Larry Greenfield, as we saw there, the three competing candidates on the Republican side trying to outdo each other at AIPAC in trying to embrace Israel. What does AIPAC want from the Republicans?
The same thing it wants from the Democrats, which is an expression of the strategic drivers that Hillary mentioned, the strong role of America in the Middle East, its alliance with Israel, and its strategic relationship with democracies and friends and trading partners, and a political coalition based on Christians and Jews and others in the United States, a very large number of Americans who expect and request that America's political leadership, both presidential candidates and Congress, express through legislation, through policy, support for the U.S.-Israel special relationship, strategic relationship. I agree that what the candidates were saying was, we stand with you, the pro-Israel lobby. The reason they do so is not merely because 2% of America is Jewish, but because a large number of Americans, mostly Christian, are firmly in the pro-U.S.-Israel alliance camp.
I'm just wondering, though.
But that point, but those people existed in the United States before 1992. And that's really where we see the pivot. So for the first 20 plus years of Israel's existence, for the first nearly 40 years of Israel's existence, no U.S. presidential candidate went to AIPAC or to the various Jewish organizations to curry votes. Eisenhower didn't go, Kennedy didn't go, Johnson didn't go, Nixon didn't go, Ford didn't go, Carter didn't go, Reagan didn't go, the first President Bush didn't go. This is a relatively recent phenomena. Even though there's always been some pro-Israel influence, the real hold on politics doesn't really happen until the end of the Cold War and the defeat of the Iraqi military inside the Middle East, where you have the defeat of the last remaining Arab military, strong Arab party, and the defeat of the Soviet Union, which leaves the United States and Israel unconstrained and focused on global, for the United States to be a global superpower, the one and only global superpower, and for Israel to be predominant in the Middle East. That's when you have this mix happen, this push from the politics inside the United States to support this U.S. policy to be the world's only unchallenged superpower,
right.
and for Israel to have this unconstrained strategy to deploy force anywhere it wants at any time in any degree necessary according to its own preferences in the Middle East. It doesn't happen until after the end of the Cold War.
Just one gentle note on that. The actual historic commitment of the American people, though, to a Jewish civilization, the friendship between the American founders, and the idea of a renewed Jewish commonwealth was very strong. Actually, Hebrew was the language spoken at some early American universities. America was founded on the idea of mimicking the Exodus. The idea of freedom for Jews, liberty, security for Jews is mimicked by American founders and those advocates of democracy. Harry Truman recognized Israel 11 minutes after its founding. JFK, Ronald Reagan, other presidents, Richard Nixon, long before AIPAC was strong, were advocates of a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. This is actually very deep and historic and tied to Jewish-Christian, Judeo-Christian civilization. So there's strong ties between America and Israel beyond one particular lobby, even though I admit it's stronger now than it had been.
Okay, I want to bring up to the present day now. A number of Republicans, and we're looking at presidential support for Israel over the last few years, a number of Republicans have sought to attack the current U.S. President, Barack Obama, over his administration's relationship with Israel. The most blistering comments were made by Liz Cheney, the daughter of the former U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney. Let's watch what she had to say.
One fact is that there is no president who has done more to delegitimize and undermine the state of Israel in recent history than President Obama.
Okay, let's put this into some kind of perspective historically. How do Barack Obama's dealings with Israel compare with those of his predecessors, including the Republicans? In a provocative blog, which was in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, Chaimi Shalev wrote this: if Obama treated Israel like Reagan did, he'd be impeached. Former President Reagan's confrontations with Israel were harsh and personal, yet Republican conservatives revere him and the Jews remember him as a great friend. Professor Mearsheimer, could you explain that for us?
It's very simple. The fact is that no two countries ever have identical interests. And the United States and Israel have historically had fundamental differences. The most glaring example of that is that every president since 1967 has opposed the building of settlements in the occupied territories. That means that every president since Lyndon Johnson's has been at loggerheads with Israeli prime ministers about the occupation in the West Bank and for a long time the Gaza Strip. Now, what's going on today is that you have two big disagreements between the White House, i.e. the Obama administration, and Prime Minister Netanyahu. One is over settlements, or the two-state solution, and the other is over Iran. We have fundamental differences here. We're not in agreement. And what the Republicans are trying to do in the election, and what they are doing today at the AIPAC conference, is trying to drive a wedge between President Obama and Jewish voters, so that those Jewish voters will switch their allegiance from President Obama to the Republican Party. So what you see going on at AIPAC is all about politics, and it is largely due to the fact that Israel and the United States do not have common interests. And from the Obama administration's point of view, Israel has become a strategic liability. It's not a strategic asset.
In that respect, Larry Greenfield, I'll come to you in a moment, Hillary. In that respect, has AIPAC inappropriately inserted itself into the election process in the United States and trying to influence its outcome?
Well, first of all, it's not just the Jewish community that these candidates would be speaking to. There are tens of millions of Christians who are pro-Israel in the United States. It's a far bigger population than just the Jewish community in the United States. So the arguments about the U.S.-Israel relationship would have to address the large number of Christians who factor that into their voting patterns as well. Second of all, I come to the defense of President Reagan, who was viscerally close to the Jewish and pro-Israel community more broadly, including Christians, and a very close ally of the United States. So I disagree with that columnist. And third of all, the point...
Well, I mean, you say you disagree. I mean, let's look at some of the things that President Reagan... He said any preemptive Israeli strike on a country that is building a nuclear weapon, which could be used to destroy Israel, would be, in his words, a tragedy. He imposed an embargo on further sales of F-16 planes to Israel because he said that Israel violated the agreement between the two countries on it being used to defend.
I'm aware of that. If you think about the evolution of President Reagan, though, as he fought the Cold War and established his principles of peace through strength, he came to become, and many American policymakers came to become extremely pleased that Israel preempted the Osiris reactor on June 7th, 1981. That helped America in Gulf War I. Right. It set back Iraq and Saddam Hussein. Similarly, many American policymakers were pleased that whoever, maybe Israel, preempted the North Korean Syrian reactor on September 6, 2007. Right.
Hillary, what would happen if those policies that President Reagan followed at that time, I mean, he failed to use the veto to protect Israel at the United Nations. I mean, he managed to get away with all of that. I mean, what if that happened now?
Excuse me.
If President Obama did that?
Don't forget the Saudi arms. Don't forget the Saudi arms deal.
Yeah. And, you know, it's what Liz Cheney is referring to again is this really important distinction between post-Cold War, the fall of the Soviet Union, and the destruction of the last Arab military power, Iraq, 1991 to the present and before then. Because it's not just Reagan. Again, it's Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan. All presidents since the founding of the State of Israel were not great friends with Israel. They were not overly friendly. They did not supply weapons. Israel got a lot of its weapons in the 1950s from Czechoslovakia, then Czechoslovakia, and from the French. They were not looking to the United States. They did not get any real economic aid from the United States. That doesn't change until 1967, until Israel demonstrates to the United States that it can be an aggressive country and it can actually seize large swaths of Arab countries, particularly Soviet-aligned Arab countries. You don't see that really change again until the end of the Cold War, when the United States and Israel are unrestrained. And the problem that Obama has, which Clinton and Bush 43 did not have because they were very happy to go along with U.S. hegemony at any cost, the problem that Obama has is he seemed to realize, at least during his 2008 campaign and his first months in office, that the United States can't afford to continue this futile pursuit of hegemony at any financial cost and any cost for American soldiers' lives. And they actually have to change that and come to terms with the Middle East as it is, which includes an Islamic Republic of Iran as it is, which would include, by any stretch of the imagination, a Palestinian state that actually has real Palestinians in it, as opposed to Gingrich's definition of that. Yeah. That's what really changes, and that's the problem Obama has faced. And unfortunately, I think Obama has really been beaten back. And where I would disagree with John is that I don't think it's the entire administration has a fundamental problem with a fundamental strategic problem with Israel, a fundamental difference of interests. President Obama came to office with a strategic impulse that he wanted to change that. He said he wanted to end the war in Iraq, not just to withdraw our troops, but end the mentality that got us into the war in Iraq. But Obama has completely retreated. He has completely been beaten back. And he is now competing with the likes of Gingrich, Santorum, and Romney to see who can outcompete each other, to be more militaristic, to not even discuss the Palestinian issue once during this entire AIPAC conference time, and to see who can do the best at weakening Iran as an independent political power.
That's right. I mean, they've effectively been something like 4 showdowns with Benjamin Netanyahu between him and...
They've had 9 or 10 meetings. Let me just jump in on one point about Israel's aggressive posture. Israel's been withdrawing from land, not acquiring it. It is 1/6 of 1% of the land in the Middle East. 1/6 of 1% of the land in the Middle East is not exactly a partner for aggression or land grab or expansion in the Middle East.
It's still occupying territory, though.
Well, that's disputed.
And the critical
and
thing
by
was
the way,
showed...
the territory that is claimed to be occupied was the site of launched attacks by Arab armies against Israel.
But it's not a moral issue, it's a strategic issue.
Wars.
But it's not a moral issue, it's a strategic issue. Right. What even you could say is tiny Israel was able to demonstrate effectively during the Cold War with the Soviet Union was that it was effectively able to use U.S. weaponry to beat back, and its own ways to get weapons, to beat back Soviet-aligned Egypt and take a huge swath of territory. That was very important for the United States strategically, and that's what builds and solidifies the alliance, which then grows through the 70s and 80s, and now is on steroids in the 1990s and the 2000s.
Well, I'm glad for that alliance, though.
Right, let's go to Professor Mearsheimer. Professor Mearsheimer, I'm wondering, when we listen to the speeches that were made by the Republican candidates to AIPAC at this conference, there was just unconditional, unwavering support for Israel. Not just that, but they took all the negotiating points and backed Israel on every single one. There was no room for any kind of maneuver there. There was no wiggle room whatsoever. And I'm wondering whether that constrains those people in Israel who'd like a negotiated settlement.
Well, I think that there's no question that it does. But those people in Israel just don't have much influence at this point in time. It's the Netanyahu government that's in the driver's seat, and the Netanyahu government is deeply committed to colonizing the West Bank and creating a greater Israel. You want to remember that Prime Minister Netanyahu was elected on the platform that he was not going to allow the Palestinians to have a viable state of their own. And his cabinet is filled with people who are committed to that policy position. Now, President Obama is opposed to that perspective. He wants to create a viable Palestinian state. What the Republicans have done is they've lined up with the Netanyahu government, and that not only thwarts people on the left, so to speak, in Israel, it also ties the hands of President Obama in very important ways. And this is why you're never going to get a two-state solution, and you're going to end up with a greater Israel that's an apartheid state.
So
and of course,
Obama
around, faces the same problem on Iran.
He's throwing around a lot of rhetoric, colonizing apartheid state. I find that uninformed. Israel is for a two-state solution. The Netanyahu government is for a two-state solution.
It's not for a two-state solution.
They are, sir, and their policy and their rhetoric and their withdrawal from Gaza and their withdrawal from the West Bank and their withdrawal from southern Lebanon, as Israel got smaller and reached out its hand for peace, it got slapped with intifada and
It is not
violence.
withdrawn from the West Bank.
It has, in fact. It's the Palestinians who control their territory in the West Bank.
Well, there's still a number of...
That's ridiculous.
Okay, you're ridiculous. Actually, the Palestinians are in charge of their lives in the West Bank. The Palestinians elected their government. The Palestinians receive money from the United States. The Palestinians have their own political representation. And they don't come to the negotiating table. Israel did freeze their settlements and did offer to make peace.
There are troops in the West Bank. There are Israeli settlements in the West Bank.
Yes, there are.
Right, and Israel controls the whole of the West Bank, illegal settlements.
It doesn't control the lives of the Palestinians do. The Palestinians rule over themselves in the West Bank.
Okay, Hillary?
Unfortunately, I think the issue here is we'll never come to terms with the reality because they're just fundamental differences that some of us see as not bridgeable.
Right.
What I would focus on here.
There is a reality here.
Yeah, no, there is a reality, and I agree with you, John. I just don't think we're not going to be able to change the minds of others here.
That may be true, but there are such things as facts.
Sir, you deny...
I agree, but what I'd like to come back to is the point that in terms of the division in the United States and what is so perilous for the United States right now, I agree with John in terms of what the Republicans have been able to do to align with the Netanyahu government, to align with the most extreme in Israel. But they also have supporters within the Obama administration. So you have people like Dennis Ross who left the Obama administration to lobby for President Obama with AIPAC. So this weekend, before this AIPAC conference this weekend, President Dennis Ross was making phone calls to students, was encouraging students to come and join AIPAC and to tell them how committed Obama is to AIPAC. You have Hillary Clinton, who's very close to Chaim Saban, another part of the pro-Israel lobby in the United States. You have a lot of forces within the Obama administration itself that have sold him out the first days he was in office for really a pro-Israel agenda. Right. Now, we can agree or disagree about whether the pro-Israel agenda is correct, and I agree with John that it is bad for the United States, but it is something that is not isolated on the Republican side. It is very much in the Democratic Party, and things will not change in November 2012 if President Obama is reelected.
Okay, Professor Mearsheimer, what do you make of the fact that at this AIPAC conference, the core issue in the Middle East, peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis, did not even feature in those talks between President Obama and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, this is for a very simple reason. The fact is that Prime Minister Netanyahu, as I said before, is opposed to a two-state solution. And the last thing that President Obama wants to do, or any American politician wants to do, is push for a two-state solution. It would be political suicide. So, not surprisingly, there's hardly any talk about this. Furthermore, from an Israeli point of view, or at least from the Netanyahu government's point of view, it makes much more sense to talk about Iran, because Iran, number one, deflects attention away from the Palestinian issue. And number two, it makes Obama look weak, and it helps maybe defeat Obama in the November elections, which of course is what the Netanyahu government and AIPAC want to do.
Okay, Professor, we have 30 seconds. I want to give Larry the last word here.
So I disagree that the fundamental issue in the Middle East right now is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It's Iran. Ask the Saudis. Ask the moderate Arab states. It's also tyranny in the Middle East. Ask the people of the Middle East, for whom the American people who pledged support to Israel also pledged support. the Arab world and the Muslim world more broadly are supported by the American people in their quest for democracy and freedom and end to tyranny.
The United States does not support democracy anywhere in the Middle East. The United States does not support democracy in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Israel, anywhere in the Middle East. That is just factually incorrect.
That's a smear of
We
the
are
American
going to have to leave it all there. We've run out of time. Thanks to all of you for joining us. And that's it from the Inside Story team here in Washington, D.C. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, where you can find more information about the program. And we want to hear from you. Tell us what stories you think we should be covering. You can send your ideas directly to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching.